Hi friends, Prepared Suburbanite here. This is a video response to a comment that I recently got on a video that I did a week or 10 days or so ago, where I apparently, or even literally, was speaking negatively about Medicare for all. One of my subscribers and frequent commenter is a fella who I'll refer to as TC. And TC objected, I think, to the negative slant that I put on my comments on Medicare for all. TC references a 2018 report called "The Costs of a National Single-Payer Healthcare System," from a conservative think tank group, the Mercatus Center, that apparently has ties to the Koch brothers. So TC states their finding was that Medicare for all would reduce the cost of health care in the USA by billions and even trillions over 10 years. The author of that particular report is a fellow named Charles Blahaus. TC then goes on to state that Medicare for all would insure everyone and remove fear from those who forego health care because the cost would be much more than they can pay. He states that everyone would benefit. Sick people would get treatment, premiums would be eliminated, co-pays would be eliminated, and drugs would be available to all who need them. He states that wage earners would pay approximately 2% and employers pay 6%. Medicare for all is polling, he says, at 70 to 75% favorability. Well, that's a supermajority, and it's so popular that he can't understand why our legislators are not moving on this topic right away, without delay. So his bottom line challenge to me was simply find a convincing argument against Medicare for all. So I have. So stay tuned. Okay, so first of all, I would like to just simply thank TC for his polite and rational comments. Certainly a lot more professional than some of the comments that I get that actually threaten harm to me and my family. And I just wanted to say thanks to TC for putting out an intelligent question framed in a very respectful manner. So thank you. Here's a little background about me and my career history. I spent over 30 years as a healthcare financial professional. I had administrative responsibilities in a number of different hospitals that I worked for: the registration function, the admission function, the patient billing function, the whole collection, insurance verifications to insurance billings, all that. And then I spent about 10 years of that 30-some years as a consultant to other hospitals and healthcare organizations, physician groups, and things like that, to help them deal with the realities of healthcare financial management. I also was president of the North Carolina chapter of the Healthcare Financial Management Association here in North Carolina, and very proud of my affiliation with that top-notch organization. So I've got some perspective on healthcare financing, and I wanted to share some of my thoughts about how it all comes together with Medicare for all. So to address TC's points, the first point that he makes was that the Mercatus Center report finding was that Medicare for all would reduce the cost of health care by billions or even trillions over 10 years. I believe that came from a comment that Bernie Sanders made where he said, quote, "Let me thank the Koch brothers, of all people, for sponsoring a study that shows that Medicare for all would save the American people $2 trillion over a 10-year period. And AOC echoed the same talking point in a CNN interview recently, August of 2018. So here's what's really going on with that particular point. The paper says that the 2017 Medicare for All bill that was introduced by Bernie Sanders would, under conservative estimates, increase federal budget commitments by approximately $32.6 trillion during its first 10 years of full implementation. The Sanders campaign comment that the idea would result in less spending on U.S. health care, and here's where that figure came from. The campaign refers to figures not highlighted in the Mercatus Center report. The report shows that between 2022 and 2031, the currently projected cost of healthcare expenditures in the U.S. would be $59.4 trillion, but would dip to $57.6 trillion under the Medicare for All plan. That difference, which is almost $2 trillion, but not quite, that's the $2 trillion that the Sanders campaign is saying we're going to save. Charles Blauhaus, the author of that particular report, responded by saying, and I'll quote him, that it is likely the cost of Medicare for All would be substantially greater than these estimates of $57.6 trillion. The estimate assumes that healthcare providers will be reimbursed at rates more than 40% lower than those currently paid by private health insurance. To put that in perspective, the total current U.S. spending on healthcare is $3.65 trillion. $3.65 trillion. So over 10 years, without any increases or inflation and cost, we could see $36.5 trillion over a 10-year period in U.S. healthcare expenditures. Now, if you add a simple 5% increase, which is about what it's been running on an annual basis, you're going to end up with $51.9 trillion. And that's without Medicare for All. That's just the current system without any changes. And then you add in Medicare for All, the additional cost there of $30+ trillion. You're talking $85 to $90 trillion. That's a lot of money. And you know what? Bottom line is, this country is not going to be able to afford that kind of expenditures on healthcare. So my conclusion on TC's point number one was that the distorted findings of the $2 trillion savings are based on estimates that cannot be proven accurate. Therefore, the Sanders statement is invalid. And the reference to a $2 trillion savings is just smoke and mirrors. TC's second point, so point number two, is that Medicare for All would ensure everyone and remove fear from those who forego health care because the cost is much more than they can pay. He states that everyone would benefit. Sick people would get treatment, premiums would be eliminated, co-pays would be eliminated, and drugs would be available to all who need them. And in general, I agree with TC's point here. The way that Medicare for All is currently formulated, that's a pretty close to being 100% true statement. But you gotta consider the cost. It's astronomical. It's beyond measure. Holy smokes. We could be looking at U.S. healthcare expenditures pushing 85 to 90 trillion dollars over 10 years. That's insane. TC's third point was that wage earners would pay approximately 2% and employers would pay 6%. And he kind of went on to say that employers would be jumping with joy because they'd actually be saving money there. We'll get to that in a sec. What I found out, and it took quite a bit of research to try to pin down exactly what the financing mechanisms and options are really going to be, and I found what appears to be Bernie Sanders' own options on financing his Medicare for All plan. So his first point is that there would be a 7.5% income-based premium paid by employers, with a couple of exceptions here or there, but 7.5% versus TC's estimate at 6%. It's 1.5%. That could amount to be a lot. His second point from Bernie Sanders was that it would be a 4% income-based premium paid by households. Now, I say households here, not employees. So households, so 4% tax, basically, on households for their health insurance premiums. Right now, employees, wage earners, let's call them wage earners, would pay approximately 2%. That's what's currently going on right now. And those are wage earners. Households, different story. Some are wage earners, some are not, but there's going to be a 4% income-based premium, with some exceptions here and there. But bottom line, it's 4% versus TC's original estimate of 2%. It's about twice the difference there, and a whole different subset of people that would be affected by this. Those are just the first two. TC does not go on to explain all the rest of the funding mechanisms and options that Bernie Sanders is endorsing. So bottom line, here we go. Number 3, remove the health tax preference exclusion. Right now, when an employer pays health insurance premiums for and on behalf of its employees' health insurance coverage as an employee benefit, they don't pay taxes on that amount of money. Bernie Sanders says we're taking that away. So the 6% that employers would, or 7.5% that employers would be forced to pay, is still taxable income to those corporate employers. Bernie Sanders is recommending a progressive income tax increase to 40% for folks at 250 to 500,000 K in annual income, 45% if it's $500,000 to $2 million, 50% if it's $2 million to $10 million in annual income, and 52% if it's over $10 million in annual income. Now, it's progressive, yep. Taxing capital gains and dividends would be at the same rate as income from work, earned income. It's not the current status right now, but in order to find a few extra dollars to help fund this massive expenditure, we're going to tax capital gains and dividends at the same rate as income, wage income. That'll have an effect on what happens with capital gains, how people calculate capital gains, when they do capital gains, and investment in certain kinds of vehicles that provide dividends. They're going to be paying a higher tax rate. Yeah, it's going to change the dynamics there too. He's recommending a limit on tax deductions of 28% if your income is over $250,000 a year. He would implement progressive estate taxes. Now, for the most part, estates accumulate their value over time from post-tax income and investments. Yep. So let's tax them again. Yeah, let's tax them again. When they die and pass it on to their heirs, yeah, let's tax it again. All right, so how about this one? A wealth tax of 1%. And I'm not sure if the 1% is on income or if it's on total wealth. It might be total wealth. For the top 0.1% of the wealthiest people in the United States. Now, there's going to be a few people that would be affected by that. But to pay a wealth tax of 1%, that's one of his options. Closing other tax loopholes, pretty complicated, but yeah, let's close them down. A one-time tax on corporate offshore profits. I think that's all based on the assumption that companies make a ton of money offshore and they leave it offshore, and they shouldn't, and we should be taxing all that money just because they earned it someplace else. I'm not quite sure I understand the whole thing, other than it's another mechanism of progressive taxation, transfer payments from the wealthiest to the rest. He would implement a fee on financial institutions. Doesn't get into a lot of specifics about what that fee would be based on, but my sense is it's kind of a they have to pay back what they got in bailouts or something in 2008 when all the financial institutions ended up behind the old proverbial 8-ball there. And his final point was to eliminate the inventory accounting method called LIFO, which is last in, first out, for corporations that do inventory valuations. Because that's one of the more favorable ones from a tax savings perspective, let's just do away with that. So we'll just eliminate it. So my conclusion on his point number 3 is that the funding cost of Medicare for all amounts to much more than TC would like to admit. Items 3 through 12 are all simply socialist wealth transfer policies. And while it may, in total, fund the increased cost of Medicare for all, there's a lot of other considerations, like reduced infrastructure investment by corporations, reduced research and development expenditures, reduced salaries and wages, reduced jobs, social considerations of unemployment, job relocation expenses, those kinds of things have to be accounted for in this total funding equation. And who pays for those taxes that he's going to levy on all the rich and all the corporations and all that? You know who pays for that? The corporations really don't pay for that. We pay for that. They offer a service at a certain price. We say that's a fair price. We buy it. We get a favorable win-win transaction under the capitalism. But their cost includes all those expenditures for the taxes, fees, levies, you name it. Who ends up paying for it? The consumer of those products. That's you and me. We will have much more out of pocket in hidden taxes because we will be paying the corporate taxes. All right, TC's fourth point was that Medicare for All is polling at 70 to 75%. That's a supermajority, and it's so popular that he can't understand why the legislatures aren't moving on it urgently. Well, I did find that there are surveys out there that are looking at a 70 to 70 thereabouts range, percent favorability range for Medicare for all. Here's one of the more conservative ones, conducted by the Kaiser Family Foundation, and they found that 71% of their respondents supported the idea when told that it would guarantee health insurance as a right for all Americans. But when told that the plan would eliminate private health insurance and require people to pay more in taxes, the support fell to 37%. And if told that it would cause some medical treatments and some tests to be delayed, the support dropped to 26%. Peter Suderman writes in his column for Reason.com, and here I'll quote him, "A new poll suggests that a clear majority of Americans support Medicare for all until they are told what's in it and how it works." Yep, it's all dependent on how you ask the question. So the conclusion on point number 4, that the polling is so high that it's a supermajority and so popular that we should act on it urgently and right away and all that. Once people understand the implications and the costs, the support drops right away. All right, so enough of addressing individual points that TC made in his comment on that particular video. I'm going to share some personal thoughts that Medicare for All, the way it's currently been proposed back in 2017 by Bernie Sanders, and then a reaffirmation with a few changes recently by the same Bernie Sanders, that Medicare for All is the purest form of socialism I think I've seen being proposed in this country for a long, long time. It's popular because this is an urgent issue. Healthcare access, healthcare cost, healthcare financing and funding has been a huge issue for decades. I suspect it's even worse today than it was in 1965 when Medicare went into effect. And I was started working in the hospital industry in 1972. So Medicare was still sort of young at that particular point in time, and I can remember what the Medicare issues were at the time, what the financing was at the time, how private insurance worked at the time, and I've seen it change drastically over time. But to me, the real right way to deal with any component of a vibrant economic society is to keep the government the heck out of it. All they do is complicate things. All they do is reduce competition. They minimize innovation. They stymie growth. They bankrupt providers. It's just awful. So Medicare for All, the way it's been proposed right now, and there may be better ways, but the way it's proposed right now is way too expensive, and it's simply socialism in its purest form. There will be delays. There will be slower care delivery. Right now, there is some pent-up demand from the uninsured, from those that are minimally insured, from those that just say, well, I can't afford it because of the really high deductible plans that I've got, so I'm putting off getting my health care. There's a perception that Medicare for All is going to be free, at least at the point of service. No premiums, no deductibles, no co-insurance, no co-pays. So the perception's going to be, hey, it's free, and it's not going to cost me anything out of pocket, so I'm going to go get this taken care of, whatever it is. And I think that pent-up demand is going to be a lot, huge. And I'm not sure that the current healthcare industry infrastructure can support that onslaught without having massive delays in service. There will end up being fewer hospitals, fewer physicians, and fewer medical professionals overall. The burden of the taxes, the burden of the reduced reimbursement rates that a government-controlled financing system is going to impose on healthcare providers is going to be much more than they can handle. What are they going to do? They're going to have to cut costs. Well, they're going to reduce investments in research and development. They're going to reduce investments in plant property and equipment. They're going to reduce their overall cost of their human resources, payments, wages, the number of jobs that are going to be available, the workload that they're going to put on the remaining employees. It's going to change the environment of healthcare so dramatically in 5 or 10 years, we're not even going to recognize it. But the myth is, you enact Medicare for all today, everything's going to stay exactly the same and everybody's going to be treated fairly and happily and we'll all live happily ever after. That's the fallacy of socialism. Patient choice. Another thing, I can't speak too much about this because I'm not a provider, I'm just a finance guy, but I suspect that patient choice is going to be even more limited in the future under Medicare for All than it is today. Now, there are tremendous amounts of Medicare rulings and regulations that define what conditions must be present in order for Medicare to pay for certain kinds of services and surgeries and inpatient admissions versus outpatient surgeries and all that. The coverage issues manual is huge and it's complex and it's very, very difficult to understand. So it's going to get worse, because there isn't going to be any additional competition in the marketplace. See, Medicare for All is basically going to eliminate private insurance. It's going to put Blue Cross out of business, going to put Humana out of business, Cigna, all the rest of them. There isn't going to be any place for them anymore other than to maybe be claims processing contractors for the federal government. But they won't be in the insurance business anymore. And I guess that makes TC rather happy because he believes that they're relatively evil anyway. So maybe eliminating them is kind of a good thing for at least that perspective. But there's a tremendous amount of job loss that's built into that equation. The healthcare industry represents nearly 20% of the gross domestic product right now. That's a ton of jobs. That's a ton of people that work at Blue Cross and that work at Cigna and Humana and all those other third-party health insurers. They're not going to be employed. And yeah, there's even some money being proposed for job retraining and all that kind of stuff. Well, if the rest of the corporations are going to be forced into paying much higher fees and taxes and reduced incentives for providing employees with benefits, there's not going to be the job openings to retrain the people to move into. So I think there's going to be kind of a cascade effect with this that's really going to be bad. I don't have all the answers on how to solve the current quote-unquote crisis in our healthcare system. But I do believe that our expectations for the future and our expectations in the past about healthcare financing and healthcare insurance has been off the mark by a long ways. I can't imagine how long it would take for my car insurance agent to begin actually laughing when I hand them my bill for an oil change and tire rotation on my car and say, yeah, I need you to pay for this. That doesn't happen. Routine maintenance isn't covered by your auto insurance. Routine maintenance isn't covered by your house insurance. You don't get reimbursed for washing your windows or painting your house or those tiny little things that you do every day, vacuuming the floors and things like that. You don't get reimbursed for that. It doesn't work that way. But it does seem to be our expectation for healthcare. You go do a wellness check with your physician, and guess what? You're expecting your health insurance company to pay for that. You do a med check. Yep, there you go. That's going to be paid for. I've talked to a number of physicians in the past in my role as an administrator and executive and a consultant. Most physicians believe that whatever they do ought to be covered by insurance. Well, that's not necessarily true. And the counterpoint is if the physician orders a foot x-ray for a guy with a broken finger, there isn't an insurance company around that's going to pay for that. So that's the absurd kind of story there. They're just not going to pay for it. But that physician says, but it's my medical determination that says I want that test for that particular problem. Well, no. Insurance companies are saying, hey, it's our money. Yeah, you paid for us to manage your money through your insurance premium on a monthly basis, but we want to manage the expenditures. So we're going to say, if you got a broken finger, we'll pay for a finger x-ray, but we're not going to pay for a foot x-ray for a broken finger. You see how that works? All right, so there's tons and tons of medical necessity issues. In fact, there's a whole coverage issues manual within the Medicare system that's volumes and volumes and volumes thick. All the prerequisite conditions, what services have to be done so that you can move from step 1 in the treatment plan to step 2 in the treatment plan to step 3 in the treatment plan. It's done to help manage the expenditures. I don't think it's done because it makes everybody feel good. It's done to manage the expenses and the expenditures. So they have to promulgate rules and put them in place and say, bottom line is, you got a broken finger, you get a finger x-ray. You got a broken foot, you get a foot x-ray, but you can't have a foot x-ray for a broken finger. So somebody's got to draw those lines. And what I expect to see under Medicare for All is even more of that kind of top-down decision-making and removing the patient and even the physician from the decision-making process. It's going to be tough, but our expectations are way out of line, and I think that re-looking at how we actually approach the healthcare financing system will go an awful long way to increasing coverage, to increasing the number of folks that are going to be covered under these new ideas. But what I'm having a hard time dealing with right now is I don't see anybody on the conservative side, the Republican side, coming up with these kinds of ideas. So I'm dismayed by that. I would love to see a bigger, broader, more robust, more coverage, more access in our current healthcare system. But the proposal that's out there that's called Medicare for All isn't going to get the job done. This is the Prepared Suburbanite reminding you all to be prepared and be prepared always. And I hope to see you all on the next video.